Hello. Each week, or as it fits in, I will do a brief summary of each of the chapters that you have read in your textbook so that you can get a feel for what I think are the essential points that are being discussed in a particular chapter. So, the first chapter here is educational research, its nature, and rules of operation. So, let's talk a little bit about that. Whenever we have a question, whenever there are questions that we have in the school, whether it's about an instructional practice, for instance, is it more effective to use problem-based instruction than using traditional class lecture? Do students score better on SOL test when we teach them test taking strategies, etc., etc. So whenever we have these kinds of questions, um, we are trying to find answers. And one of the ways that is possible to find answers is to kind of look at tradition. How have we always done it? I mean, I've always been doing class lectures, so therefore I will always be doing class lectures. That's the best way. Students best learn when they hear it directly from me. If that doesn't give us the results that we are after, it's been very, very common to look to authorities or experts. Just look at the way that many school systems at the beginning of the school year bring in a new person or a new technology or a new instructional methodology for some kind of consultants or experts that are supposed to be the new experts in the field, and we bring them in and sometimes it gives us results, and sometimes it simply does not fit the way that our school is working. And of course, a third way is to use good logical human reasons. However, many of these familiar sources have proven to be unsuccessful. Why? Because oftentimes these decisions are being made based on uh, biases, based on personal opinions, and not on data. So there are other ways that we can achieve answers to questions that we ask. One of them is through the study of science, consulting what other people have searched or have studied in our field and apply those findings to what we are doing. Or there is specifically the scientific method, which was first proposed by John Dewey, who basically said that there are 5 steps in this process of the scientific method. First, to clarify the main question that is inherent to the problem. Two, state a hypothesis, which is basically a possible answer to the question. Collect, analyze, and interpret information that we have gathered. Then forming conclusions, and then use these conclusions to verify or reject the hypothesis that we have had. And then we have research, which is a systematic investigation. Actually, as your textbook points out, a researcher means to search after or to investigate. So whenever we use research, we are using data to make informed decisions about the questions that we have. Oop. So, what is the scientific method? It is a strategy used to determine facts and relationships, then used to answer questions and resolve problems. So, let's just look about what facts are. They are agreements made by people knowledgeable in the field, that you can have facts that regardless of how we view them, they are simply facts that we have in front of us. Sometimes we are also looking at relationships, cause and effect associations amongst facts. For instance, is there a relationship between student achievement and socioeconomic status? And then we have common sense, which is logical human reasoning. So the scientific method is all about thinking and making decisions objectively. So, as we mentioned before, Dewey proposed one way of 5 steps in a scientific method. Here is what Merkle proposes, is that there basically are 7 steps in this process. First, we identify a problem. Then we state the main question inherent in the problem. Then we state a hypothesis. And let me just be clear here that not every research question has a hypothesis. This is very true in what we talk about as quantitative research, but is not true in qualitative research and not always in action research, which I will be talking about later what action research is. Then, after we have stated the hypothesis or articulated a research question, then we collect information related to the question. We then, after we have the data, let me back up. It is really important to think through what kind of data will answer the question that I have asked or the question that I have in front of me, and only collect the necessary data that will help us answer the question that we have in front of us. Once we have the data, we will analyze and we will interpret the information. Then the 6th step is then to begin to form conclusions derived from the analysis and interpretation, and last but not least, use conclusions to verify or reject the hypothesis or the research questions, or more practically, to inform the practice of what we'll be doing in the classroom. As I mentioned before, steps are not always followed in this order, and not in every situation, not in every research question do we always have each of these 7 steps. Let's look at educational research. Educational research is really the application of the scientific method to the educational phenomenon. So what do we mean by that? As I mentioned before, it can be related to instructional practices. It can be related to student learning. It can be related to how we develop the best school culture, but any kind of relevant question that will help us to improve student learning can be exposed to educational research. In the educational research process, there are proposed the following steps, or Merkle proposes the following steps that you see here to identify a problem, a broad research problem. Then state the main question inherent in the problem. State a hypothesis if it is relevant to the hypothesis. Then review pertinent and related literature. Collect information related to the question. Analyze and interpret information. Form conclusions, and then use the conclusions. Let me just go back and talk a little bit about what is a research question. Research questions indicate what the researcher actually hopes to determine or to find. For instance, what are the benefits of problem-based instruction in a 2nd grade math class? Hypothesis, a statement that can be tested statistically. For instance, there is no difference in the average score of 8th grade civics students who received instruction in the detailed test-taking strategy. So these are just a couple of examples about trying to understand the difference between a research question and a research hypothesis. Whenever we are conducting good research, we have a set of operating rules that we need to follow in order for us to make sure that we get good, solid research. So we start out with certain legal requirements and legal principles for using human subjects in research. So the principle of protection assures that research does not place participants in physical, mental, and emotional harm. The principle of confidentiality assures the confidentiality of participant and that it is maintained unless express permission to the contrary is obtained. And in schools, colleges, universities, there are typically what is called institutional review boards or IRBs that we have to review all kinds of research that is being done in that particular setting. So you will see when you look ahead in the course outline for this course is that at one point you have to do a city training online. This is related to the protection of human rights in research. You will also see that during the next semester, the second semester of this class, where you actually have to complete a piece of research, we will have to submit your research question and your research proposal to the University of Richmond IRB board for approval, or more accurately, in our case, we will most likely be exempt from IRB approval, but that is not a decision that we make, that is a decision that the IRB boards make at the University of Richmond. There are also a number of ethical principles or the morality of research. The first is called the principle of beneficence. And this is really this notion about that whenever we do research, we do it to gather knowledge and shed light on educational practices, not to find fault, not to find blame, not to do anything. So research has to be beneficial. It has to be helpful. The second principle is the principle of honesty. And that really means that data should be reported as collected. Nothing should be suppressed. Nothing should be altered. A few years back, I worked with a student at a different university who, after they had completed their research project and had not found what they had found, what they had hoped to find, said to me, "Oh, if I'm ever going to do this research again, I will have to change the research question so that I find the conclusions that I would like to find." And we had a big discussion about this notion about being honest about the data. We report the data and the findings, whether they confirm our research problem or what we expected to find or not. The last principle is the principle of accurate disclosure. And this is this notion about that we should disclose to people that they are in a research project. So whenever we are conducting research with human subjects, they should give their consent. They should agree to participate. But it is important to understand that it does not mean that there is full disclosure. For instance, if you did an experimental study where one group received a special new treatment and the other group did not receive a treatment, we want to make sure that we would not tell who gets the experiential treatment and who does not get the experiential treatment. So accurate but not complete disclosure. We also differentiate between consent and assent. Assent is being given by minors when they participate in research project. And then there are a number of more philosophical principles. The principle of significance, is the principle that the findings contribute to human knowledge or they have to be useful somewhere. The principle of generalizability is the notion about that the study should be able to be used in other settings, in other places. However, as we begin to talk about qualitative research in detail, you will realize that there is not a principle of generalizability that is associated with qualitative research. And then the issue of replicability, the description of the research procedures, meaning what you actually do, the data you collected, who your subjects were, etc., 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 actually have to be so detailed, described that other people could copy your study so that they could find the same findings or hope to find the same findings as you. And then the principle of probability, that it is likely that the findings that we find are associated with the research questions that we ask. And then there are a number of procedural principles, the principles of researchability. Can the topic be approached and resolved through established research procedures. The principle of parsimony is basically the idea about that the simpler a theory is, the better it is, provided that it explains the phenomenon that we want to investigate. So research questions should be stated clearly, and only the needed data should be collected and reported to answer the questions at hand. Principle of credibility, the notion that the topic must be significant and reliable, and the operating principles of the research must be followed. The second part of this is of being credible or the third part of it is that it should be reliable, it should be consistent and valid for the data that is being collected. The fourth part is that appropriate data analysis methods must be used, and fifth, findings must be supported by the data. 6, conclusions must be logical, persuasive, and reported accurately and clearly. And then rival explanations, to take measures to forestall criticisms that other findings or other conclusions could be made based on the research that we have completed. This is the end of chapter 1.